when I'm zooming in and out, I'm just pressing my middle mouse button. If I wanted to orbit my perspective view, I can press Alt or on a PC or Option on a Mac and click my left mouse button and drag around my perspective. So that's going to allow me to kind of rotate my perspective around the scene. It's not actually changing any of the objects in the scene, right? I'm just rotating my perspective of the objects around the scene. Oh, what else did I want to say about that? Oh, right. So middle mouse button. So panning around the scene, kind of like moving the objects around 2 dimensions at a time while kind of locking in that third axis. We can kind of pan around the scene too, which can be useful if you don't want to rotate your view, but you want to kind of just move your camera's perspective view in kind of a square relationship to the perspective that it's already in. That's called panning. And I do that by pressing down the control or the option or the alt button, the option on a Mac or the alt on a PC, and my middle mouse button. So I'm actually clicking down on it until I hear a little click and I get those little 4 arrow axes and I know I can pan. So that's panning, and then with my middle mouse button and then holding down the same alt or option key and then left click and drag to rotate. All right, so now I can rotate. So W is going to select my object, press W or select translate over here. If I wanted to rotate, I could click E on my keyboard or select the rotation tool here. Same holds true. I can rotate around each axis, and those are kind of hard-coded based on the world axis view here. You can see Y up, Z back, and X kind of moving this way. That's going to obviously change as if I rotate. So if I hold down my option or alt and left mouse button and rotate around my scene, you can see that the axes are changing with my point of view, right? So that's one way to kind of tell where you are in space, right? So which axis do you actually want to rotate around? So if I kind of zoom in here, I can see this Z axis. If I wanted to rotate around this axis, imagine a pole kind of sticking through my object, and then that's the axis that it's rotating around, right? So if you stuck a pole through an object and you wanted to rotate around that object, that's the axis. The circle kind of the outer circle, right, that's kind of like square with our perspective, that's going to allow you to imagine you've stuck a pole from your perspective, your point of view. That pole that the object's going to rotate around is coming directly from your eyeballs, right? So that pole will change if I rotate my point of view, right? So the other thing that I have turned on, which will be useful for you, I'll show you in a second. So now the pole is kind of sticking out from my eyeball perspective this way, right? And so that's going to be a more complicated rotation, right? So you can see in the pointing again at the screen, like you can see all of these rotational numbers are changing because it's a complex rotation based on my perspective view, not based on a single axis. If I'm just rotating around the x-axis, well, now I've made a complex rotation so that all of the rotations are being affected because I've used this outer rotation. But I can always go back and say this go 0, 0, 0, and now when I rotate around one axis, it's just one number that gets changed. It's just one angle that gets changed. Okay. Rotate, scale. So I can either click my scale button or press R for scale. and same thing, you can scale one axis at a time. So one axis at a time. Or you can grab the center and do a uniform scale. Or you can kind of scale 2 axes at a time or 2 axes at a time. All right, so I'm going to set this scale back to 1, 1, 1. And then there's one other way that you can, so same holds true for all of these objects. You can set scales and rotations and translations for all of these objects. So over here in my channel box editor, the channel box editor, you can click on it, it will disappear, click on it again, it'll show back up. You can also toggle through these modeling toolkit and attribute editor up here with these little icons too. And I think I've pulled out my human IK probably in another class because I was working with it, so I'm going to put it back. No, I want to put it back here. Yeah. All right, so there. All right, so now I put it back in my tab here, so that's probably what it looks like for you all. You can toggle between these items, tool settings, and that, and channel box layer, either up through these icons or down through these tabs. We're going to be staying between this channel box layer editor and maybe some of the modeling toolkits. But I tend to use the modeling toolkit. I tend to use different ways to get into some of these tools. So you'll see like these combine, separate Boolean tools. A lot of those are the same tools that you see here. The attribute editor is going to be the next tab that we spend a lot of time in. So for each one of these objects, you get a bunch of these little tabs, which are a little bit more granular data than we get from this channel box. So channel box is really just telling you where it is, what the scale is, and is it rotated. The attribute editor is going to give you, again, more granular details. With scale set to 1, I can go into, so I can change rotations here by putting in numbers, but I can also go in and define like a certain size. So by default, Maya's going to create your cube set at 1 unit by 1 unit by 1 unit, and I think the default units are meters. Centimeters? I'm going to have to double check. I'll double check and like add a pop-up window or something to the video. If you wanted, let's say, your sphere and your cube to be the same size, remember, not remember, but Maya measures your sphere in radii, right? And so that's half of the diameter. So a radius of 1 is going to be a diameter of 2, which means that when so that means that the sphere is going to look twice as big as a cube with the unit of 1 kind of as the default. It's kind of hard to tell in this perspective view, right? Because things that are closer look bigger anyway. So what you want to do is get really dialed into these precise height and sizes for your shapes. You're going to want to go into something called the orthographic views. So over here is how we kind of toggle between this quad view. So orthographic views, you can see here, it's much easier to tell, one, where these positions, how these objects relate to one another in space, right? Like my cube, I've kind of moved around, it's hovering. It might even have like a rotation on it. Yeah, it looks like it has a rotation on it. So I can actually take off the rotation, and then I can take off the translate too. So this is X, Y, and Z, and my Y is my up. So I want to say I'm on the same plane. So you can see now the center here is centered here with the cube, and we can tell that the sphere is quite a bit bigger. So in orthographic view, you'll never get that kind of foreshortening effect, right? So things in perspective view that are closer look bigger, things that are further away look smaller. In my top orthographic view, my front orthographic view, and my side orthographic view, the sizes of the shapes will never change, right? So I can move this cube, wrong viewport. So I'm looking now at my side viewport here. So I can actually move my cube back in space, and it's never going to change its scale, right? Like I can see when I move it in front of the cube or on either side of the cube that it shows up as being either kind of in front or behind it from this side view, but it never changes size, right? But these side views are like really useful. Like let's say I actually did want my cube in the center of my sphere. I can try to kind of get it there like in my perspective view, but like I could be like, oh yeah, that looks great. But I know by checking out my side view and my top view that the cube is actually offset. So I can kind of drag it in closer to center in my top view and kind of double check in my side view, right, as well. So if you're trying to get really precise relationships between things, this quad view is really good. If you're kind of like going in and doing painting work or texture work, I like to have like more what I call retail space in my window. So a single pane is going to give you more kind of visual retail space, but sometimes you'll need to be in that side view. And then you can always double or single click on this attribute editor, right, and it will close that window down if you need more kind of view space, and you don't need the window, you don't need the asset the view editor features. Okay. So I can also, as I mentioned, go in and change under my poly tab the height. So this is not a function of the scale. This is actually in units. So if I wanted 2 units big by 2 units big, I can change the kind of base size of my object. If I go back to my cube, you can see the scale hasn't changed. This is 100%. Maya works with decimals, not percentages. So a scale of 1 is 100%. A scale of 0.5 is 50% of its kind of base size. And you can change, again, that base size over here in my poly cube, in the poly tab. You can also see that the width, the height, and the depth, that those units, let me see, go back over here. In my scale, I'm going to go back to 1, 1, 1, go back to my poly tab. The width, the height, and the depth, that's base size, doesn't change when you change the scale, right? So it's 2, 2, 2. That's 2 units by 2 units by 2 units. That's kind of base size. But I can scale it up to say I want, in this scene, I want this version of that object to be 5 times. Ooh, this will be a good point in a second. I want the cube to be 5 times its kind of base size, which means 5 times 2, it's 10 units. 10 units big, width, depth, and height. All right, you'll also see that when I made the cube bigger in my perspective view, I'm actually looking at this sphere from the inside of my cube, right? So I can move, can I move my cube? Let's see if I can do it. X, let's say 0, there we go. I think I'm kind of running out. So you can kind of start to see, so that clipping plane, you know, like if you're playing a game and things start disappearing, right? That's usually because you're either inside of it, like the camera view is starting to become inside of it. So that's what's happening here. If I rotate around, I can start to see that little sphere kind of sticking out. But if I zoom in again from the side, I can see that at a certain point I zoom into the sphere and it turns black. Now that's going to be true. I'm going to get into some more of the complex editing here too.